All my life, I was told I was cursed. My mother would whisper it in anger. My brother would spit it like poison, and the neighbors would look at me with pity in their eyes, as though I carried misfortune in my very blood. I learned to walk in silence, to bury my dreams, to survive under the weight of a fate I never asked for. But destiny has a way of revealing its truth at the most unexpected moments. For me, it happened on the very night that should have been my happiest, my wedding night. Under glittering chandeliers and smiling faces, my brother humiliated me in front of my husband, calling me an ill-fated woman. My mother's rage followed, ordering me to leave and never return. I stood frozen, stripped of dignity, my silence heavier than chains. And then the phone rang. Just one call, sharp, loud, undeniable. What began as my downfall turned into theirs, and what they thought was my curse became their undoing. This is the story of how the ill-fated woman, they tried to destroy Rose from the ashes of humiliation and claimed a destiny far brighter than any of them could have imagined. My name is Sophia, and on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life, I discovered just how cruel family could be. My wedding hall sparkled with golden lights, laughter, and the faint scent of roses. Guests in shimmering dresses and tailored suits filled the room, clinking glasses and whispering blessings. For a moment, I believed my life was finally stepping into a new chapter filled with joy and love. But destiny had other plans. As I walked toward my husband, his smile steadying my trembling nerves, my brother stepped forward. His eyes, sharp and mocking, met mine with a glare that pierced straight through my heart. Then, in front of everyone, including my new husband, he spat the words I would never forget. "You are an ill-fated woman." The words echoed through the hall, louder than the music, sharper than any blade. Gasps spread across the room, and whispers followed like wildfire. My husband's grip tightened around my hand, but even he could not shield me from the humiliation that burned my cheeks. Before I could find the strength to reply, my mother's voice boomed across the hall. Her fury was a storm, her tone laced with venom. "Leave. Leave this hall and never return. You are no daughter of mine." Every word from her mouth felt like a slap, stripping me of the little dignity I still held. My chest tightened, but I stood frozen, my lips sealed in silence. My eyes scanned the faces of the guests. Some pitied me, others judged me, but not a single soul dared to stand by my side. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But nothing came. Only silence. And then, just as my world seemed ready to collapse, my brother's phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the suffocating silence, like a blade. He picked it up casually at first, but within seconds, his expression transformed. His smirk vanished. His hands trembled. The room grew still once again. I didn't know it yet, but that call was about to change everything, not just for him, but for all of us. The ringtone that cut through the hall still echoed in my ears when my brother pressed the phone against his cheek. At first, he tried to act casual, his voice low, as if nothing could touch his arrogance. But then, something in his tone shifted. I watched his face closely. The color drained from his cheeks, his posture stiffened, and his confident smirk dissolved into a look of panic. His eyes darted toward my mother, then quickly away. The hall, once filled with whispers about me, now fell into a new kind of silence, one charged with curiosity. My mother frowned. "What is it?" she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. But my brother didn't answer. His hand shook as he clutched the phone tighter, his eyes fixed on the floor as though the truth he had just heard was too heavy to meet anyone's gaze. Guests leaned forward, trying to catch fragments of his words. My husband's grip on my hand tightened. Even he sensed that something was about to unravel. Finally, my brother stammered, his voice trembling in a way I had never heard before. What do you mean?" "That's not possible." The room gasped in unison, though none of us truly understood yet. My mother's face flushed red with impatience. She marched toward him and snatched the phone from his hand, pressing it to her ear. Her expression changed within seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally horror. The same woman who had screamed at me to leave now stood speechless, her lips parted, but unable to form a single word. The guests stirred, murmurs sweeping across the hall. My humiliation was momentarily forgotten, overshadowed by the mystery that had just unfolded. I stood in silence, my heart pounding, watching my mother and brother unravel in front of everyone. I didn't know what news had shaken them so deeply, but I could feel it in my bones. The balance of power in that room had shifted. For the first time, their cruelty wasn't aimed at me. It was turning back on them. I straightened my shoulders and looked around the hall. For the first time that evening, I wasn't the one who looked weak. Whatever truth that phone carried, it was about to rewrite all of our destinies. My mother's hand trembled as she held the phone to her ear. I had never seen her like that. This was the woman who had ordered me to leave my own wedding without blinking, the woman whose voice could silence an entire room. And now, she stood paralyzed, as if the very ground beneath her had collapsed. Her voice broke when she finally spoke. "No, this can't be true." The murmur of the guests grew louder. People exchanged worried glances, some whispering theories, others craning their necks for a better view. My humiliation had dissolved, replaced by curiosity. Every eye was now fixed on my mother and brother. My brother snatched the phone back, desperation twisting his face. "Tell me again," he barked, his voice shaking. "Say it clearly, what happened?" The hall went quiet again. Even the music had stopped. I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers above, the shallow breaths of the guests, and the pounding of my own heart. Finally, my brother's knees buckled. He slumped into a chair, covering his face with his hands. My mother staggered back a step, her lips quivering. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "What's going on?" My voice, though steady, cut through the hall like a blade. For the first time that evening, it wasn't me on trial, it was them. My mother didn't answer. My brother lifted his face, his eyes red and wild. "It's ruined," he whispered. "Everything, it's all ruined." The guests gasped. My husband leaned closer, his voice low in my ear. "Sophia, something big has happened. Stay calm." I nodded, though inside, my heart was racing. For so long I had been their target, their scapegoat, their so-called ill-fated one. But tonight, something had shifted. The weight of fate was no longer crushing me, it was chasing them. And deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of their downfall. The silence in the hall was unbearable. Guests leaned forward, whispering to each other, their curiosity growing like wildfire. My brother sat hunched in his chair, his face pale, while my mother paced frantically, clutching the edge of her shawl as though it could hold her collapsing world together. I took a slow step forward. My voice came out calm, though inside I was trembling. "What happened? What was in that call?" At first, no one answered. My brother avoided my gaze, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. The weight of their silence pressed against the walls, pressing against my chest. Finally, one of the guests, an older uncle who had overheard pieces of the call, stood up. His voice trembled, but it carried through the hall. "It's about your father's company," he said, his eyes shifting between me, my brother, and my mother. "The deal collapsed. Everything is gone." Gasps erupted. The chandeliers above seemed to flicker, as though the very light in the room was shaken by the words. I froze. My father's company? Gone? My brother leapt to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at the uncle. "Lies. You don't know anything," he shouted, but his voice cracked halfway, betraying his fear. My mother clutched her chest, her breathing shallow. "No, no, this can't be true," she murmured. "We were promised, we were secure." The truth settled over the hall like a storm cloud. The insults, the humiliation, their cruel words calling me ill-fated. Suddenly, it wasn't me who carried bad fortune. It was them. I stood taller, my silence no longer weakness, but strength. My husband's hand pressed against mine, steady and firm, as if reminding me that I wasn't alone. For the first time in years, I felt the tide turning. And as I looked at my mother and brother unraveling in front of everyone, One thought burned in my mind. Fate hadn't cursed me. Fate was finally delivering justice. The hall that had once been filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses was now nothing but a stage for chaos. My brother's voice cracked as he shouted denials, each one weaker than the last. My mother stumbled back toward the table, gripping it for balance, her elegant composure dissolving into raw panic. Guests whispered loudly now, their murmurs carrying like thunder. I caught fragments. The company bankrupt? So, that's why they've been lashing out. And they called her ill-fated? The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same family who had mocked me, branding me cursed, were now exposed as the ones truly drowning in misfortune. My brother slammed his fist on the table. It's not true. They're lying. But his trembling body betrayed him. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. The screen was still lit, the call details glowing for anyone to see. One of the guests bent down, glanced at the screen, and announced, "It's the bank." The news came directly from them. The hall erupted in gasps again. My mother's face drained of color. She sank into a chair, covering her mouth as if trying to hold back a scream. And me? I stood tall, the same woman they had just ordered to leave forever. I didn't need to speak. My silence said more than any words ever could. My husband's arms slipped around me, protective and proud. He whispered in my ear, "You see, Sophia? Truth always finds its way." For years, I had been their scapegoat, their ill-fated one. But tonight, in front of everyone, fate had shown its true hand. The family who tried to bury me under humiliation was now drowning in their own downfall. And deep inside, a spark of strength lit up. I knew this was just the beginning. Their collapse had only started, and I was finally free to rise. The air inside the hall was thick with tension. Moments ago, I had been standing there as the target of ridicule, my brother calling me ill-fated, my mother banishing me like an outcast. But now, eyes that once pitied me turned with sympathy, even respect. The whispers had shifted. She did nothing wrong. Look at her standing there, strong. It was never her curse. It was theirs all along. I felt their gazes pressing into me, not with judgment this time, but with quiet acknowledgement. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. My mother buried her face in her hands, shoulders trembling as though she was finally realizing the fragility of the empire she had flaunted for so long. My brother paced like a trapped animal, muttering under his breath, "We'll fix it, it's not over, it can't be over." But the quiver in his voice betrayed the truth. It was over. My husband leaned close, his voice low but steady. "Hold your head high, Sophia. They try to crush you, but tonight, the truth defended you." I lifted my chin, letting the light of the chandeliers fall across my face. For the first time that night, I didn't feel like the broken daughter, the unwanted sister, or the cursed bride. I felt like myself, whole, unshaken, and free. Then, one of my father's business partners, an older man in a tailored navy suit, rose from his seat. His voice cut through the murmurs. "It's confirmed. The company has defaulted. The contracts are gone. They've lost everything." The hall erupted again. Gasps, whispers, people shaking their heads. My mother's hand dropped from her mouth. My brother froze mid-stride. The very foundation they had used to tower over me had crumbled. Their pride, their wealth, their authority, it was all collapsing in front of the same audience they had used to humiliate me. And in that moment I realized, fate hadn't marked me as ill-fated. Fate had been waiting for this night to unmask the truth. The wedding hall had transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer a celebration of love, but a theater of truth. My mother sat trembling in her chair, her perfect makeup streaked by tears. My brother, usually so arrogant, looked like a cornered animal, pacing with desperation etched into every movement. The guests were no longer whispering quietly. They were openly discussing the disgrace. Imagine humiliating your own daughter like that. And now look, they've lost everything. She was never cursed. They were blind with pride. Their words floated through the air, not knives to my skin, but shields around me. For years, their gossip had hurt me, but tonight, it became my armor. I felt something shift inside me, a surge of strength I didn't know I still had. My husband squeezed my hand gently, encouraging me. For the first time that night, I let my voice rise above the storm. All my life, I said, my words sharp and steady, you called me ill-fated. You blamed me for shadows that weren't mine. Tonight, in front of everyone, the truth has shown itself. It was never me who carried misfortune. It was your cruelty, your pride, and your lies. The room fell utterly silent. My words echoed against the walls, each one a strike against the empire they had built on arrogance. My mother's lips trembled, but no reply came. My brother clenched his fists, but he couldn't speak either. One guest, a woman who had known my family for years, stood up and said aloud what everyone else was thinking. She's right. The curse was never hers, it was yours. The applause that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to seal their shame. Enough to wash away mine. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel cursed. I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt free. And as I stood tall in the center of that hall, I knew this was no longer just a wedding. This was the rebirth of my destiny. The hall was no longer on their side. The very guests my family had once impressed with wealth and pride were now turning their backs one by one. Business partners shook their heads in disappointment, whispering about broken contracts and failed promises. Distant relatives gathered in clusters, their pitying eyes no longer directed at me, but at the hollow shell my mother and brother had become. One man, my father's former associate, stood, his voice cold. We trusted your family, but you betrayed that trust. Tonight, everyone can see the truth. Your empire was built on arrogance, not honor. The word stung not for me, but for them. My mother bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. My brother opened his mouth to fight back, but no one was listening anymore. Their voices had lost power. One by one, guests began to leave their side of the hall. Chairs scraped against the floor as people turned away. Some approached me quietly, placing gentle hands on my arm, offering me words of comfort. Stay strong. You didn't deserve any of this. The truth always finds its way. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being whispered about in shame. I was the one being acknowledged. My husband stepped beside me, his arms steady around my shoulders. His voice rang clear across the hall. This is our wedding day, and no cruelty, no downfall, can steal it from us. The remaining guests clapped softly, their applause not just for him, but for us, for the strength it took to withstand humiliation and rise from it. I looked across the hall at my mother and brother. They sat alone, surrounded not by friends or admirers, but by the ruins of their pride. For years they had called me cursed. Tonight, fate revealed who was truly marked. I turned away from them, my hand in my husband's. The chandeliers above gleamed brighter than ever, and for the first time that night, I felt like the light was shining for me. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The air in the hall felt different now. The storm had passed, leaving behind silence, shame, and truth. My mother and brother sat abandoned, their empire of pride reduced to ashes in a single evening. They had mocked me, cursed me, and tried to strip me of my dignity, but fate had given me the final word. I turned away from them, my heart lighter than it had been in years. My husband squeezed my hand firmly and whispered, "This is your day, Sophia. Don't let them steal another second of it." The guests who remained gathered around us, clapping softly at first, then louder, as though trying to lift the weight that had pressed on me all night. Someone restarted the music. The chandeliers above glittered, no longer casting shadows of humiliation, but shining like a crown over me. My husband led me to the center of the hall. For a moment, I hesitated, part of me still carrying the sting of their cruelty. But as I looked into his steady eyes, I knew he was right. This was my wedding, and no one, neither my mother's rage nor my brother's venom, could erase that. We began to dance. slowly at first, then with confidence. The applause grew louder, the music swelled, and the laughter returned. Guests clapped in rhythm, some even joining us on the floor. The hall that had once witnessed my humiliation was now alive again, but this time it was alive for me. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother clutching her shawl, her eyes hollow, my brother staring at the ground. They were no longer the center of attention. They were shadows at the edge of a light that no longer belonged to them. As my husband twirled me across the floor, I felt the freedom in every step. I wasn't the ill-fated woman they had named me. I was the bride reclaiming her destiny. The celebration continued, not in spite of what had happened, but because of it. For in their attempt to destroy me, they had only revealed who I truly was, unbroken, unshaken, and destined to rise. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a story far greater than theirs could ever be. The days that followed my wedding were unlike anything I had expected. I thought I would carry the sting of my family's cruelty for years, but instead, I carried something else: freedom. The weight of their judgment, their endless taunts, their constant need to remind me I was ill-fated. It was gone. My mother and brother were too busy scrambling to salvage what was left of their crumbling empire. Rumors spread quickly, of contracts broken, debts uncovered, and doors once open now slammed shut in their faces. The same guests who had watched my humiliation now whispered only about their downfall. They no longer had time to curse me. Their own curses had come home. Meanwhile, I stepped into a life that felt completely new. My husband and I moved into a modest but warm home, one filled not with grand chandeliers or marble floors, but with laughter, kindness, and respect. Each morning, I woke up without fear of their voices breaking me down. Each night, I went to bed knowing I was safe, cherished, and free. I started small projects of my own, things I had once been told were useless dreams. My husband encouraged me at every step, reminding me that my worth had never been defined by my family's scorn. Slowly, I began to see myself not as a woman who had been cursed, but as a woman who had survived and risen stronger. One evening, as we sat together on the porch watching the sunset, my husband took my hand and said softly, "You see, Sophia? They were wrong all along. You were never ill-fated. You were chosen to stand through the storm so you could walk into the light." Tears stung my eyes, but they were no longer tears of pain. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I hadn't known I carried. Gratitude for the love that had found me in the ashes of humiliation. Gratitude for the chance to start again. And as the sky turned golden, I realized something that would stay with me forever. I wasn't the unlucky one. I was the survivor, the fighter, the bride who turned her curse into destiny. This was my new life, and it was only the beginning.